Have you ever wondered who were the first Semitic people of Mesopotamia? Yeah, neither have I. So, the Akkadians were a Semitic people who migrated into northern Mesopotamia from the west during the end of the 4th millennium BCE. They are named after the lost city of Agad or Akkad, which is likely older than them because its name is non-Akkadian in origin. Akkadian names first appeared in Sumerian texts from around the 3rd millennium BCE and from around circa 2500 BCE. Texts fully written in Akkadian began to appear, written in cuneiform, a writing system adopted from the Sumerians that used wedge-shaped symbols pressed in wet clay, making Old Akkadian, aka Pre-Sargonic, Sargonic, and Ur-3rd Akkadian the earliest documented Semitic language which was spoken in Mesopotamia. Just to be clear, Old Akkadian is not the most adequate name for the 3rd millennium Akkadian language, since it did not give rise to later Akkadian dialects such as Babylonian and Assyrian. During the early dynasty period, the Akkadians seem to have heavily infused nature with the divine, and this informed their sacred literature, ritual practices, and the way gods and goddesses were defined. As far as we know, in this early pantheon, they had two main gods, the god El or Lum, who originally might have been a specific but unnamed god, presumably a high universal deity, and Ashtar, who was initially described as a mother goddess. We can also see some very rare mentions of younger gods, from which the most notable ones are the gods Ea, Sin, Shamash, and the goddess Ishtar, and that's all we know about the ancient Akkadian pantheon. At least, all we know before it started to be heavily influenced by and syncretized with the Sumerian pantheon. It was during pre-Sargonic times that the Akkadian and Sumerian pantheons really started to become more and more syncretized, and at that time we see that Ashtar also appears as a lion, a warrior, and presumably as the planet Venus, while El becomes highly syncretized with the Sumerian god An, to the point that El's name could be written using the cuneiform sign for the god An, a practice that became the standard during the time of King Naram-Sin of Akkad. Also during the early merging of the pantheons, we see the gods Ea, Sin, Shamash, and Ishtar be identified with the Sumerian gods Anki, Nana, Utu, and Inanna, a fact that can help us understand how they were seen by the early dynasty Akkadians. To simplify, the Akkadian religion can be understood as the same as the Sumerian religion, but with some tweaks and different conceptualizations of the gods and their roles. The transition is blurry, but after the early dynasty period, Sargon or Shah Rukh Khan became the king of Akkad, and from there he expanded his kingdom across Mesopotamia, the Levant, Anatolia, and even sent military expeditions as far south as today's Saudi Arabia and Oman in the Arabian Peninsula, thereby uniting Sumerian and Akkadian speakers under one rule and founding what many consider to be the world's first empire, though the meaning of this term is not precise, and there are earlier Sumerian claimants, such as the Sumerian king Lugal-Zaggisi of Uruk. The rise of the Akkadians is crucial because once Sargon was in power, he appointed his daughter, known by the Sumerian name of Enheduanna, to the position of high priestess of the moon god Nana in the Sumerian city-state of Ur, a position of great power and influence, most likely to further syncretize both religions. Enheduanna has been celebrated as the earliest named author in history, as a number of works in Sumerian literature, such as the Exaltation of Inanna, feature her as the first-person narrator, and other works, such as the hymns to the goddess Inanna and the Sumerian temple hymns, may identify her as their author. Enheduanna's texts were written in the Sumerian language due to her position amongst the Sumerian people and because the Akkadians began to use it as a religious language, but she did influence their religion quite a lot. During her time, we see the gods appear in more vulnerable positions to each other, being frequently depicted engaged in fierce combat with one another. Therefore, the gods became seen as individuals vying for dominance, meaning that their former hierarchy was no longer fixed, which indicates a fundamental change from the initial Sumerian understanding. During the Sargonic times, there was a lot of emphasis in trying to syncretize both pantheons, and for the most part, that happened almost effortless to most of the Sumerian gods, except two main ones: the great god Enlil, the god of air and winds, and his son Ninurta, a great warrior god. These two were never equated with any Akkadian gods, although holding a very high position in their pantheon. From the time of Enheduanna, the goddess Ishtar rose to power and became the object of cult by the higher classes of the empire, likely thanks to her extreme devotion to her lady. We also see the goddess Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld, an elder sister of Ishtar, according to the Sumerians, lose some of her prestige when the role of ruler of the abyssal lands was also assigned to Nergal, the god of death, a dual rulership that the Akkadians tried to harmonize by making Nergal Ereshkigal's husband. Ishtar was arguably the most prominent deity amongst the Akkadian people. They understood her not only as a powerful, furious, gorgeous, and warmongering goddess like the Sumerians did, but also as essential for the existence of the world, since she possessed the very design of life and controlled the movement of the natural world. She was commonly known as the goddess of love, fertility, and sex, who sometimes also acted as a prostitute and in others entered people's dreams, usually kings, of course, to either show them prophecies or lie with them, thereby granting them her blessing. In the myth, Inanna and the divine powers, we see her outsmarting or outdrinking Enki, the god of wisdom, and grabbing hold of over 50 divine powers, which were the basis of the Sumerian culture, becoming then the mightiest deity of the whole pantheon. As the most high amongst the Anunnaki, Ishtar was assigned by the supreme god An to conquer the foreigner lands, and during her campaign, or rampage I should say, she was faced with a mighty opponent. You see, Ishtar was a goddess of nature, meaning that as long as all beings depended on its cycles, her authority was unchallenged and her might unmatched. But during her conquest, she came across a mountain called Ebi, where nature had no power. There, the trees were always lush with fruit, and all kinds of animals fed on grasses, while predator and prey laid side by side in complete peace.
Ah, shit.
Such a sight made Ishtar furious, and seeing that the mountain wouldn't submit to her will, nature's will, she went to An to seek his help. However, he and the other gods were terrified of Ebi's power and perfection, and so refused to help her subdue it. So she overthrew An and usurped his throne, becoming the leader of the pantheon.
Later, bitches.
And then obliterated Ebi from the face of the earth. What the fuck? Ishtar had conquered all the foreigner lands and possessed all the divine powers except the ones related to the Kigal, the underworld. So in the myth, Inanna's descent to the underworld, we read that she went down there to conquer death itself. At the great gates of the palace Ganzer, the palace of the underworld, she told the gatekeeper Neti that she had come to attend the funeral of Gugalana, her brother-in-law, also known as the Bull of Heaven, who was slain by Gilgamesh, or Gilgamesh as some may say, and Enkidu when An brought him to earth on her behest to try and kill Gilgamesh. Upon hearing that her sister was at her gates, Ereshkigal was both afraid and furious, so she let her in through a side entrance, and after passing each of the 7 minor gates, she was stripped of one divine power and one piece of clothing, under the pretense that this was the custom of the land. In the throne room womb, naked and without her divine powers, she was still capable of overthrowing her sister, but right after, she was judged by the great judges of the dead and sentenced to death. Once dead, her corpse was hung on a hook for 3 days and 3 nights until her divine emissary, Ninshubur, begged Enki to resurrect her master, and he did. However, to be freed from the land of the dead, she needed to provide a substitute. In this case, that person was her husband, Dumuzid. She wasn't too fond of him. Fun fact, Dumuzid tried to escape with the help of Shamash, the sun god, and his brother-in-law, so he had to be hunted down and dragged to the land of darkness and misery by several demons, where he became a judge of the dead. The pre-Sargonic and Sargonic Akkadians believed in and practiced sympathetic magic, a type of magic characterized by the enactment of a desired outcome. Therefore, they also believed in the evil eye, scapegoating, charms, magical spells, and of course, black magic, that is, magic intended to cause some type of harm or destruction. Whilst it did not happen all the time, it was very common to solicit the help of a particular deity during magical rituals. Normally, this deity should be the one responsible for the particular subject. In Old Akkadian, we see 3 written rituals. They are called Against the Demon, Love Charm, and the other one does not have a name, but describes a scapegoating ritual. The Sumerians also had a similar or identical practice that can be seen as counterparts of the Akkadian ones, but the Akkadians placed much more emphasis on magic than them.
You like that one, huh?